Hi everyone, I'm Daisy and welcome to Spiritual Mixtape. For those of you tuning in for the first time, thanks to our feature on British Airways in-flight entertainment, I'm thrilled to have you here. As our community has grown, I wanted to share the very first episode of the podcast. For new listeners, this is a great introduction, and for my loyal followers, it's a recap of where it all began. In this episode, I'll share the story of how Spiritual Mixtape was born. 5 years ago, I was an executive in the music industry, constantly chasing the next big thing. But after experiencing burnout and personal loss, I realized I needed to change. This journey led me to discover my passion for breathwork and all things energy. Join me as I share this story and the beginnings of Spiritual Mixtape. Let's dive in. I'm Daisy, and this is the story of how Spiritual Mixtape was born. If you had met me 5 years ago, you wouldn't have recognised me. I was a totally different person. An exec in the music industry based between London and Los Angeles. I had the career and I had the kudos, but in reality, I was anxious, stressed, and going out of my mind. You'd be surprised at how much of this glamorous job was actual dirty work. And after well over a decade of putting out fires and dealing with meltdowns, not always my own, my mind and body were reaching a critical point. But I was invested and I wasn't about to walk away. My whole identity was wrapped up in my title, and I hate to admit this, but my self-worth was attached to a paycheck. Even though I knew how I was feeling wasn't right, I thought if I could just get to that next promotion, that new client, or even a pay rise, I would be able to outrun that feeling. Living like this, though, it wasn't sustainable for me, and my breaking point came when I was in New York, dealing with the biggest crisis of my career, sitting in a hotel room, frantically making phone calls when my dad called, and it would have been the middle of the night for him. He was in tears. I have cancer, Daisy. Anyone who has had to go through that journey with a loved one understands how utterly soul-destroying it is for you and for them. It can eat up everything you know and everything you love if you don't have a solid support system. We were lucky though, and after a very touch and go 6 months, Dad took a positive turn, and for a year we had a version of him back. But watching my best friend slowly fade away in front of me started to put my choices and my priorities into perspective. I knew that my life deserved a soundtrack that I didn't just want to hear, but that made me get up and sing and dance and feel like I was living a life that was full of joy, not full of deadlines. For all of my success, I had no idea how to change the tracks of my own life. I started to look outside of what I knew and what I understood. First came sound healing, and I went cautiously into this, feeling skeptical about it and about the new people coming into my life. But as I learned to trust, I opened up, and so did new doors. It came as a shock to see how tight and tense my body was when I began yoga. A decade before, I could have done crow with the best of them, but not anymore. Now I could barely touch my toes. That's when I started to listen to my body, and something happened. On a morning run, I experienced what I can only call a moving meditation. As I jogged past the reservoir in Silver Lake, I saw myself so clearly. I was happy and I was healthy, and in this vision I could see that I was teaching a breathwork class by the water. This was such a departure from the life that I was currently living that I told no one about it. I was scared of being judged, but honestly, my biggest judge and my biggest critic was always me. After that moment, though, my gut instincts really started to kick in. And I was kind of shocked to feel them. It had been so long since I had felt that mind-body connection. But I had to follow what I was feeling. And although I didn't have the time or the physical health to commit to a 200-hour yoga teacher training certification, I still signed up. My dad was delighted. I said to him, "This means I won't be able to come home as regularly." And he said, "I'm just so happy you found your path." I, on the other hand, was still skeptical about this being my path, but I couldn't argue with the little flower of a feeling that was growing inside of me. And if I listened really hard, I could hear that music coming back into my life. A month after I finished the certification, I called my dad again, and in fairness, I think he had been testing the waters for a few weeks now, mainly with himself, saying things like, "Daisy, there are some really nice hospices near here." But that day, he told me he had made the decision to move into assisted living, and when the time had come, a hospice. That was the day I quit my job. Of course, I had been thinking about it, but until I heard the words "no more treatment" come from my dad, I had always made an excuse to stay. Now I knew that life was too short. Dad passed away a few months later. It was a hard time compounded by the COVID lockdowns. And as we all struggled with 2020, I was struck by how much I couldn't return to my old life, even if I'd wanted to. For the longest time, I had been a touring agent, and that whole part of the industry had gone overnight. Everything I thought I knew really had vanished. I thought I had chosen to press pause on my career, but life had pressed stop on me. The mixtape I had played for years was gone, done, eject, scratched and impossible to listen to. I took a look at my life and at the world and thought in fear, I don't have any tracks left. What am I going to put on my next mixtape? Has the music gone? Then one day I realised, like a lightning bolt, Daisy, you still have tracks people want to hear. So I replaced what I was playing on repeat. I can only be of value when I work in an office with, work doesn't need to look like it used to. I stopped playing I'm tired and overworked with, damn, yoga lights me up more than it tires me out. Creating community online in a time when we were so isolated was one of the most meaningful moments of my life, especially as this part of the journey began within the cancer support community. For the first time in my whole life, I had no plan. There was no goal. There was no new client. I was just present, and people consistently showed up for this version of me. As I became more involved, they began to request things of me. The number one was breathing techniques. As I dove deeper and practiced what I was teaching, I found my breath, and for the first time, I heard my heart. It was like hearing my own inner anthem. Now, despite everything I have just said about finding myself and the solid ground, I wouldn't be being honest if I didn't tell you that I would give this all up, give it all back to have more time with my dad, or for him to have had an end that was as kind to him as he was kind in life. But every time I take a step forward in this new path, every time I am able to help someone heal or manifest or just feel a little bit closer to themselves, I know that he is right there alongside me, crafting that spiritual mixtape, talking to me about the tracks I am playing. He used to remind me, you can only be you. And sadly, it took him leaving for me to discover my true self. So with each track I now play, my intention is to help you honor where you have come from and who you are becoming. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Spiritual Mixtape. I hope that my story has inspired you to find your path and continue to invest in its unfolding. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay updated with the latest from Spiritual Mixtape, be sure to join our mailing list. You'll get exclusive content, updates on upcoming episodes, and special offers straight to your inbox. You'll find the link in the show notes below. And if you found value in today's episode, please take a moment to leave a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more listeners and continue to grow this amazing community. So stay connected, stay inspired, and keep creating your very own spiritual mixtape. Until next time, take care and breathe deep.